The last fiery slivers of the sun bled across the vast savanna sky, painting the air in hues of orange and deep indigo. Young Bola, barely 10 years old, sat beneath the colossal, ancient baobab tree that marked the edge of their compound, its shadow stretching out like a grasping hand. She clutched a worn, wooden doll, the only keepsake of her late mother, her small frame radiating a palpable loneliness that seemed to defy the warmth of the evening. Her father, a respected elder and trader named Bola, we will call him Baba Bola to distinguish the characters, had married again 6 moons past, and the subsequent change in the household had been a slow, chilling decline. The new stepmother, also named Bola, possessed a cold beauty and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, a smile that Bola instinctively mistrusted. Every corner of the once joyful home now felt heavy with an unspoken tension, an atmosphere Bola navigated with the silence of a wounded animal. A sudden, sharp caw from an unseen bird startled her, drawing her attention back to the silent, looming presence of the stepmother standing in the doorway of their hut. Stepmother Bola's silhouette was framed by the dim light inside, her hands resting on her hips in a gesture of proprietary impatience. The look she gave the child was not one of anger, but of utter, dismissive coldness, as if looking upon a stray pebble. Bola, the stepmother's voice was low and smooth, like polished stone. The chores are not finished. The water pots are empty, and the evening meal fire must be stoked. There was no kindness in the command, only the expectation of immediate, unquestioning obedience, crushing the last vestiges of the child's fading daylight rest. The stepmother watched without moving until the child, with a deep sigh that held the weight of a far older soul, slowly pushed herself up from the dusty ground. As Bola walked toward the well, she passed close to the stepmother, catching a faint, medicinal, earthy scent, a smell not of common herbs, but something deeper and more unsettling, reminiscent of the dark, damp places in the forest. She shivered, not from the cooling air, but from the realization that this beautiful, demanding woman carried secrets beneath her smooth skin, secrets she instinctively knew were woven into the very fabric of her new life, bringing a terrible sorrow with them. The flickering light of the cooking fire danced across the walls of the small, open-air kitchen, casting huge, distorted shadows. Bola was meticulously cleaning the worn earthenware cooking pots, her small hands raw from the coarse grit used for scrubbing. She tried to work without making a sound, mindful of her stepmother who sat nearby, sewing a delicate head wrap, her focus absolute and unforgiving. Suddenly, a heavy terracotta water pot, slippery with residual water, slipped from Bola's grasp. It hit the hard-packed earth with a sickening, shattering crack, splitting into several irreparable pieces. The sound seemed deafening in the still night, instantly silencing the gentle tap-tap of the stepmother's needlework. Bola froze, her breath catching in her throat, a wave of terror washing over her. Stepmother Bola rose slowly, deliberately, the movement of her body radiating a cold, focused fury far more terrifying than a loud outburst. She did not raise her voice, but her words, delivered in a chillingly controlled whisper, cut deeper than any shout could have. That pot, she articulated clearly, stepping over the fragments, was a wedding gift to your father's first wife. It was meant to last generations. Tears welled up in Bola's eyes, not just for the pot, but for the implied connection to the mother she could barely remember, now destroyed by her own clumsiness. "I am sorry, stepmother," she stammered, kneeling to frantically gather the sharp pieces. The stepmother watched her without a flicker of pity, the moonlight glinting mercilessly off the severity in her gaze, making her look like a judge handing down a cruel sentence. "Your sorrow is noted," Stepmother Bola said, her voice dropping lower, imbued with a venomous sweetness. "But apologies do not mend clay. You will replace this, little one. Every copper you earn helping the market women will now be mine until the full price is paid. Let this be a lesson that carelessness has a heavy cost." The words felt like a physical weight settling upon Bola's young shoulders, cementing the bitter truth. In this house, there was no grace, only debt and punishment. The village was just beginning to stir with the first crow of the rooster when Bola entered her father's sleeping hut to lay out his fresh clothes for his market journey. Baba Bola, a man whose laughter once shook the rafters, looked aged and weary even in his sleep, the lines around his eyes deepening with a constant, perplexing sadness. He had become distant, his spirit slowly eroded by a mysterious fatigue that left him blind to the misery in his own home. Bola arranged his cloth tunic and trousers carefully, her fingers lingering briefly on the familiar texture, longing for a moment of his attention, a reassuring touch that had become a distant memory. She knew she could not speak of the broken pot nor the stepmother's quiet cruelty, because every time she had tried her father would dismiss it, attributing her stories to a child's imagination and a lingering grief for her mother. Baba Bola woke with a grunt, rubbing his temples, a look of profound distress momentarily crossing his face before being quickly masked. He noticed Bola, offering a fleeting, tired smile that did not warm his eyes. "Ah, Bola," he murmured, his voice lacking its former power. "You are up early. Your stepmother is very good. She runs the house with such efficiency. You must listen to her, my daughter." His words, meant as reassurance, landed like sharp stones in her heart, confirming her deepest fear. Her father chose not to see the truth. He was trapped in a haze she couldn't penetrate, accepting the stepmother's polished facade as simple, admirable competence. She longed to shake him, to remind him of the joy and warmth his home once held before this cold regime took over. "Yes, Baba," Bola whispered, lowering her gaze to hide the sudden rush of stinging tears. She knew that her father's absence of mind, his baffling inability to protect her, was a greater pain than any chore or punishment stepmother Bola could devise. His withdrawn presence was the secret ingredient that allowed the stepmother's dark plans to flourish unchallenged beneath the roof of their family home. A deep, unnerving silence settled over the compound well past the midnight hour. Everyone in the village was asleep, save for the solitary figure of stepmother Bola. She knelt on the floor of her private sleeping hut, which she had insisted be kept strictly separate from the main family living space, an air of ritualistic secrecy surrounding the small space. In the center of the earthen floor, a small, controlled fire crackled inside a broken clay brazier. Stepmother Bola was mixing a dark, pulpy concoction in a mortar and pestle, humming a low, tuneless melody that seemed more like a dirge than a song. The air was thick with the strange, medicinal smell that Bola had first noticed, a heavy miasma of unfamiliar, dried roots and bitter herbs. From a leather pouch hanging around her neck, she carefully withdrew a small, intricately carved wooden figure, a representation of a strong, healthy man. She held it over the smoke, her eyes glinting with a cold, focused intent. She whispered words into the smoky air, words in a language not of the village, binding incantations meant to confuse and weaken the mind of a man. A sharp, painful cough suddenly echoed from Baba Bola's distant sleeping hut, followed by a restless groan. Stepmother Bola paused her work, a faint, cruel smile playing upon her lips, a brief flash of satisfaction crossing her face as she heard the sound of her dark work taking effect. The man she married was strong, but her potions were stronger, slowly sapping his vitality and rendering him a docile, unquestioning figurehead. With a final, decisive movement, she poured the thick, dark liquid into a small, stoppered gourd, ready to be mixed into her husband's morning drink. She knew the child Bola saw her with suspicion, but the girl's words held no power against the fog she was weaving around the father's mind. Stepmother Bola extinguished the embers, the smoke curling around her like a dark, private victory, her secrets safe, and her control absolute. The stepmother had left the compound briefly to visit the market, leaving Bola with a long list of thankless, repetitive tasks. While sweeping the stepmother's private hut, a chore usually forbidden but grudgingly assigned today, Bola noticed a loose corner of the reed sleeping mat. Curiosity, a dangerous ally, pulled at her. She lifted the mat gently, a gasp escaping her lips at what lay beneath. Nestled in a slight depression in the earth was not a coil of money or a piece of jewelry, but a small, smooth, river-polished stone upon which was tied a single faded lock of hair that was undeniably the rich, deep black of her late mother's. The sight sent a visceral jolt of shock through her, an icy wave of disbelief mixed with growing dread. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, intimate object, placed there with intent. This was not just grief for her mother's passing. This felt like an active, malignant use of her memory. The stone felt strangely cold and heavy in her small hand, buzzing with a suppressed energy that seemed to speak of malice and control. All the small, disparate pieces of the puzzle, the odd scent, the father's withdrawn state, the stepmother's coldness, snapped terrifyingly into focus. She dropped the stone back into its hiding place as if it had burned her, quickly smoothing the mat over it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The truth was suddenly too large, too monstrous for a young girl to hold. Stepmother Bola was not merely cruel, she was weaving darkness, and the spirit of Bola's own mother was somehow involved, trapped or bound by this awful secret. Overcome by a sudden, protective surge of desperate rage, not for herself, but for the memory of her mother and the soul of her father, Bola retreated, her small hands clenched into fists. A vow was silently made in that dark corner. She would uncover this secret, not just for her survival, but to break the chains binding her family. The child's grief had finally matured into the focus of a vengeful force. Bola, her small body trembling with a mixture of fear and urgent purpose, hurried toward the compound of Elder Mama, the oldest and wisest woman in the village, the one who held knowledge of herbs and the delicate balance of spirits. She clutched the secret close to her chest, the discovery of her mother's hair tied to the burial stone, a heavy burden she hoped the elder could lift. She found Elder Mama sitting under a shade awning, grinding peppers for the evening stew, her face a map of deep wrinkles and ancient wisdom. Bola poured out her story in a rush, stumbling over the details of her father's sudden, inexplicable weakness, the strange odors, and finally, showing the elder the quick, charcoal sketch she had made of the trinket. Elder Mama listened patiently, her eyes remaining fixed on the grinding stone, her expression unreadable. When Bola finished, the elder paused her work, sighing heavily. "Little Bola," she said gently, her voice like rustling dry leaves, "the grief of a child is a powerful thing, and it often creates shadows where there are none. Your stepmother runs your household well. Your father is merely busy with his trading." The dismissal felt like a physical blow. The elder's words stripped Bola of her truth, leaving her feeling exposed and foolish. She realized the stepmother's facade of efficiency and piety was so expertly crafted that it blinded even the most respected members of the community. Bola's eyes pleaded, but the elder simply patted her head, advising her to be a dutiful child and stop dwelling on ghost stories. Walking away, the weight of the secret felt heavier than ever. The realization dawned that the stepmother's influence was not limited to their home. It had seeped into the community's perception, sealing Bola's fate. She was alone, isolated by a lie that everyone else was willing to believe, and the bitterness of this isolation brought fresh, hot tears of helpless anger to her eyes. Bola was tasked with delivering her father's midday meal to his stall at the bustling central market, a chore she usually loved, filled with the energy and chatter of trade. Today, however, the noise seemed muted as she approached his small, open-fronted stall. Her father sat slumped on a low stool, his head resting heavily in his hands, his goods largely untouched. He looked shockingly pale, his usually vibrant skin sallow, and his eyes bloodshot and weary. When he looked up and saw Bola, a flicker of his old warmth returned, but it quickly faded into a deep sigh. "Ah, Bola, you are a comfort," he murmured, taking the earthenware bowl from her, but his hands trembled noticeably, spilling a little of the rich pepper soup. As he ate, he picked at the food with a startling lack of appetite, a man simply going through the motions. Bola watched him, her heart aching with a deep, profound fear. She noted the strange, faint, almost smoky odor clinging to his tunic, the same medicinal scent she had detected near her stepmother's hut. It was the scent of the slow-working poison. "Baba," she asked softly, her voice thick with worry, "are you well? Your eyes look tired. Perhaps you should stay home today." Her father waved a dismissive, weak hand. "Nonsense, child. It is simply the sun. Your stepmother insists I drink the tonic she makes every morning for strength. I am fine, just busy." His unquestioning loyalty to the tonic, and thus to the stepmother's malice, was the ultimate heartbreak. Bola knew the medicinal scent was the proof, yet her father was completely trapped. She left the stall, the image of his frail figure burned into her memory, feeling the chilling conviction that she was watching her father waste away, and she was powerless to stop it. The stepmother Bola, accompanied Bola to the river washing spot, an unusual, unsettling occurrence. The setting sun cast long, orange reflections on the water, turning the calm surface into a field of molten gold. As Bola scrubbed the heavy cloths, the stepmother stood over her, a picture of immaculate composure, watching with an unervingly serene expression. "You have been quiet, little mouse," the stepmother finally drawled, her voice a soft, dangerous silk. "Are you planning another little trip to fill the elder's ears with more stories of evil doings? The elder was quite amused by your dramatic little imagination, you know." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp and predatory. Bola felt her throat tighten with indignation and terror. The stepmother knew. She knew about the visit to the elder and was mocking her failure, flaunting the complete safety of her position. The cruel satisfaction on the stepmother's face was devastating, confirming that every move Bola made was visible and easily countered. "The spirits know the truth," Bola whispered, unable to look up, tears blurring her vision as the water dripped from her hands. "They watch everything you do." The stepmother let out a sharp, joyless laugh that echoed off the tall river reeds. "The spirits, little Bola, are like everyone else. They only believe what they are shown, and I show them order and diligence." This exchange was the turning point of emotional agony. The stepmother had effectively exposed the futility of seeking help through conventional means. Bola realized that the only way to fight this evil was to confront the secret source of its power directly, a path fraught with terrifying, unimaginable risks. The opportunity arrived just before the first light, when the stepmother, following her morning routine, left the compound to draw the special water she used for the tonics. Bola knew she had only a matter of minutes. Her heart was a frantic drumbeat in her chest, but her movements were precise and quick, fueled by the obsidian's cold resolve. She slid into the stepmother's hut, the oppressive scent of the herbs hitting her immediately. She went straight to the corner where she'd seen the woman kneel, lifting the sleeping mat. The polished stone and her mother's hair were still there, confirming the earlier horror, but Bola looked past them to a small, hidden indentation in the wall behind the mat. With trembling fingers, she pried loose a small, flat stone panel and found a soft, leather pouch tucked inside. Inside the pouch was not more hair, but a collection of dried blackbird claws, a pinch of grave dirt, and most horrifyingly, a carefully folded yellowing piece of cloth, a scrap of her mother's wedding wrapper ritually cut and inscribed with strange symbols. This was the core of the stepmother's secret. She wasn't just poisoning her father. She was using her mother's essence and memory to bind and subdue him. The violation was absolute, a spiritual cruelty that struck Bola like a physical blow, bringing a fresh, agonizing wave of despair and rage. The tears came, scalding and fast, mixing with the dust of the hut floor. The sound of the stepmother's returning footsteps startled her. Bola slammed the stone panel back into place, tucked the scrap of cloth into the neckline of her own dress, a desperate, defiant act of theft, and scurried back to her own corner. She had the proof, the terrible secret, but the cost was a paralyzing, heart-wrenching pain that solidified her ultimate, vengeful purpose. The silence in the stepmother's hut was suddenly shattered, not by a shout, but by a chilling, panicked gasp. Stepmother Bola, having returned from her ritualistic water gathering, was performing her routine check of the sacred space. Her eyes, usually cold and controlled, were now wide with an animalistic fear as she frantically scrabbled beneath the sleeping mat. The small stone panel lay slightly ajar, a devastating sign. Her hand flew to the secret indentation, pulling out the empty leather pouch. The scent of her meticulously gathered, illicit ingredients still lingered, but the vital, inscribed scrap of wedding cloth was gone. Her breath hitched, realizing the true nature of the loss. It wasn't just the magic itself, but the binding link to her victim's life force that was stolen. A terrible, visceral rage took hold, twisting her face into a mask of pure fury. She knew only one person could have been in this hut and known where to look. Bola, the useless child, the persistent shadow, had not only found the secret, but had dared to disrupt the very core of her power. Her control over Baba Bola, already fragile, was now gravely compromised. She burst out of her hut and stalked toward the child's corner, her movements sharp and dangerous. Bola, though outwardly sweeping the yard, felt the seismic shift in the air, the pure venom radiating from her stepmother. The stepmother cornered her, her voice dangerously low. "The cloth. Where is it? What have you done, you pathetic serpent?" Bola met her eyes for the first time with a look of fearless defiance, the painful, protective rage fueling her courage. She said nothing, but the silent, challenging tilt of her chin was answer enough. Stepmother Bola raised her hand, but paused, realizing that striking the child now would only confirm the very wickedness she had so expertly concealed. The silence was heavier than any blow, a promise of slow, terrifying retribution. The night felt oppressive, charged with the stepmother's simmering threat. Bola lay awake, the stolen cloth pressed beneath her pillow, knowing she could not wait for the inevitable, brutal confrontation. Her father had coughed terribly throughout the night, his shallow breaths a constant, harrowing reminder of the time she had left. She had to move, and she had to be swift. Before the first light touched the horizon, while the stepmother was steeped in the deepest sleep of exhaustion from her magical workings, Bola slipped out. She took nothing but a small gourd of water, the obsidian arrowhead, and the devastating piece of cloth evidence. She looked back at her father's sleeping hut, tears blurring her vision one last time. She paused at the dusty village gates, marking the boundary between the relative safety of community life and the terrifying, unknown wilderness. Her small shadow stretched long and thin under the dying moonlight, emphasizing her vulnerability. But the heavy sense of duty and the image of her failing father propelled her forward. She knew she needed a neutral power, a healer or seer far removed from the stepmother's influence. The legend spoke of Mama Yajide, a wise woman who lived many days' journey away in the distant hills, known for her ability to read the threads of spiritual binding. The path was perilous, crossing dry riverbeds and deep forest, but it was the only road to salvation. As she stepped through the gate, the first pale streaks of dawn appeared, painting the sky in soft mauves and grays. Bola did not look back. She clutched the painful evidence, taking the first terrifying steps on a quest fueled purely by a child's breaking heart and an unflinching determination to awaken the vengeance of her mother's wronged spirit. The sun climbed high, beating down upon the open savanna with relentless, suffocating heat. Bola's small reserve of water was already half gone, and the dry air seemed to suck the moisture from her skin. The joy of the morning escape had been replaced by the raw, physical reality of the journey. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and fear was a dry taste in her mouth. She stumbled over cracked earth, her woven sandals offering little protection. Every rustle of the tall, dry grass made her stop and whirl around. Convinced the stepmother's wrath was close behind her, manifesting as some hunting beast or dark spirit sent to retrieve the stolen secret. The emotional drain of the past days combined with the physical exertion, making her legs feel like lead. She stopped beneath a solitary, thorny acacia tree, its shadow offering meager relief. Pulling out the obsidian arrowhead, she held it tightly, whispering her mother's name. It was a moment of profound, painful loneliness. She was just a child, fighting a woman who commanded dark powers against the vast indifference of the landscape. Bola forced herself to take a small, measured sip of water and then carefully unwrapped the stolen cloth. The symbols inscribed on the faded fabric seemed to pulse in the harsh sunlight, mocking her, revealing the depth of the violation. She didn't understand the script, but she understood the intent. It was a magical shackle, binding her father to sickness and her mother's essence to servitude. The sheer exhaustion and the crushing weight of her responsibility brought a sudden, cleansing wave of tears. She wept for her childhood, for her father, and for the mother whose memory had been desecrated. Yet, after the tears came a surge of cold energy. She rewrapped the evidence, stood up straight, and turned her back on the easy path, continuing her march toward the distant, hazy hills. The path led Bola into a wide, winding riverbed, now completely dry and filled with smooth, sun-baked pebbles. It offered easier footing but felt eerily silent, devoid of even the sound of insects. The air here felt unusually thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness that pricked the hairs on her neck. As she walked, she spotted something unnatural caught between two large stones. A dead monitor lizard, its once beautiful skin now dry and withered. It was placed deliberately, resting on its back, and its tongue was curled into a strange, distorted shape, pointing back toward the direction of her village. This was no natural death. Bola immediately recognized the sign. A bad omen. A clear message from the stepmother that she was aware of Bola's flight and the direction she had taken. The lizard represented betrayal and the drying up of life. A grim warning that her journey would end in failure and death. A paralyzing fear seized her. The stepmother was not only powerful, but fast. She was actively using magic to track and terrorize her. Bola wanted nothing more than to drop the evidence, turn back, and beg for forgiveness, to escape the terrifying reach of this dark influence. But as she stumbled backward, her hand brushed against the cool, hard edge of the obsidian arrowhead tucked into her clothes. The stone's solidity reminded her of the ancestors' quiet promise. She forced herself to step over the chilling omen, her head held high, refusing to allow the stepmother's terror tactics to break her resolve. She whispered a prayer to the wind, asking the river spirits to cleanse the path of this foul, tracking magic. As the sun began its final descent, Bola finally saw them. The ancient, green-cloaked hills of the seers, rising like silent sentinels on the horizon. The sight was a profound emotional relief, a beacon of hope after a day of sheer terror and physical agony. She was close, but the remaining climb was steep and the light was fading fast. Exhausted, she found a small cave entrance tucked beneath a root system, offering a moment of true, secure shelter for the first time. She ate the last handful of dried cassava root she had secreted away, rationing the remaining water. The night sounds of the hills were different, less threatening than the savanna, filled instead with the deep, protective hum of the earth. Holding the scrap of cloth, she focused on her mother's memory, channeling the painful love and the righteousness of her cause. The tears were now not of sorrow, but of sheer, adrenaline-fueled fatigue and the overwhelming weight of the task ahead. She was a child, yet she carried the destiny of her family in her worn hands. She knew that confronting Mama Yajide would require absolute honesty and an unraveling of the painful, awful truth. It would be the final, high-stakes moment of revelation. She prayed that the wise woman would not dismiss her as the village elder had, that she would recognize the powerful, wicked signature of the binding magic. Huddled in the cave, the moonlight streaming through the entrance, Bola finally allowed herself a moment of hope, knowing that in the morning she would lay her father's fate, her mother's violated spirit, and the evidence of the stepmother's terrible secret at the feet of the only person who could help. The stage was set for the reckoning. The emotional stakes are at their absolute peak, and Bola is physically and emotionally devastated but driven by a fierce purpose, now having reached the sanctuary of Mama Yajide. Would you like me to continue the story, focusing on the highly dramatic meeting with Mama Yajide and the revelation of the true, deeper secret of the stepmother's vengeful spirit? Bola emerged from her shelter with the first light, her face streaked with dust and dried tears, and began the steep, winding climb. She found Mama Yajide's compound tucked into a natural amphitheater, surrounded by flowering vines and the scent of powerful, curative herbs. Mama Yajide was not a towering, fearsome figure, but a small, serene woman with eyes that seemed to hold the entire history of the hills. Bola dropped to her knees, too exhausted and overwhelmed for formal greeting, and simply presented the piece of inscribed wedding cloth. She poured out the terrible story, the father's decay, the stepmother's cold dominance, and the discovery of the violated keepsake, all in breathless, desperate whispers. The effort cost her the last of her strength, and she finished her tale racked by silent sobs. Mama Yajide did not rush or interrupt. She took the cloth, examining the crude, painful symbols etched into the fabric with a practiced, solemn intensity. Her expression was grave, confirming Bola's deepest fears without a single word. She then gently placed her hands on Bola's trembling shoulders, her touch transmitting a strange blend of ancient sorrow and powerful reassurance. This, Mama Yajide finally stated, her voice deep and resonant, is not merely a binding spell for control. This is the use of grave magic. Your stepmother, Bola, has bound the energy of your mother's soul to the health of your father, using your mother's essence to slowly drain him and secure her place. The revelation was a fresh, heart-stopping blow of spiritual horror. The wise woman then looked directly into Bola's eyes, a look that cut through the child's fear and exhaustion. You have done what no grown man dared, little one. You hold the key to breaking this curse. But to lift grave magic, we must face the spirit who helped bind it, a spirit now angry, bound, and seeking vengeance. Mama Yajide began to prepare a restorative infusion for the child, while simultaneously mixing ingredients for a protective barrier around the small hut. She shared the hidden history of Stepmother Bola, a tale spoken in low, somber tones that matched the gravity of their purpose. It was a story not of simple greed, but of a deeper, ancestral grievance. The woman who calls herself your stepmother is named for you. Yes, but her family line carries an old, bitter curse, the seer explained. Years ago, Baba Bola's grandfather had committed a great wrong against Stepmother Bola's matriarch, a betrayal over land and lineage that resulted in ruin and the slow death of that family's pride. Stepmother Bola had not sought simple marriage. She had been sent by her wronged lineage to infiltrate Baba Bola's life and enact a slow, complete ruin, not through violence, but through the theft of spiritual vitality and dignity. She was an instrument of generational, cold-blooded revenge, disguised as a devoted wife. The emotional weight of this revelation was crushing. Bola realized her suffering was not personal, but part of a terrible, preordained cycle of vengeance that extended back generations. Her father was not just sick, he was a sacrifice in a long-forgotten war. She wept silently, tears of despair mixed with understanding. But in her greed, Mama Yajide continued. Tapping the inscribed cloth, she made a terrible error. She bound her curse using the power of your mother's spirit. That spirit, Bola, is now a vengeful spirit, trapped and furious. The true path to victory is not just to save your father, but to set your mother free. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery colors, Mama Yajide led Bola to a secluded pool fed by a gentle waterfall, a place of pure, flowing water and spiritual clarity. Here, they would prepare the offering designed to placate the trapped vengeful spirit and ask for its alliance. They prepared a beautiful, intricate offering, sweet honey cakes, a freshly woven white cloth, and a small, perfectly carved wooden bird meant to symbolize freedom. Bola arranged the items with profound reverence, her hands steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. This was her final act of love for the mother she barely remembered. Mama Yajide instructed Bola on the final, agonizing step, the prayer. You must speak to your mother's spirit, Bola, not as a frightened child, but as her daughter who is setting her free. You must beg her to turn her vengeance not upon your father, but upon the one who bound her. Bola knelt by the water's edge, the pain of her father's suffering and the horror of her mother's spiritual captivity finally uniting into a powerful, clear plea. Tears flowed freely as she spoke, addressing the spirit directly, asking for its guidance and strength. Her voice, usually small and timid, gained a resonance of terrible authority. The water of the pool momentarily stilled, and a single, sharp gust of wind swirled the dust around the offering, a silent, powerful acknowledgement. Bola knew in that moment that her mother's vengeful spirit was listening, and that it had agreed to the alliance, fueled by a righteous anger ready to be unleashed. Back in the village, life was descending into chaos. Stepmother Bola was consumed by panic and rage over the theft of the binding cloth. She stalked the compound, her composure shattered, her beautiful face etched with fear and fury. The source of her power was gone, and her control was slipping. Baba Bola's health had deteriorated rapidly without the constant, reinforcing poison. He lay weak and shivering, coughing uncontrollably, murmuring incoherent words. He was no longer the docile victim. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing glimpses of pain and confusion as the magic failed to hold his mind completely bound. Stepmother Bola tried to administer a rough, hastily prepared tonic, forcing the bitter liquid down his throat, but the effect was minimal. Her usual quiet confidence had abandoned her. She was now frantic, searching her hut again and again, unable to believe the slip of cloth could have been taken by the frail child. She tried a desperate measure, performing the binding ritual without the cloth, using only the spirit stone and the lock of hair. But the ritual backfired spectacularly. The moment she called upon the vengeful spirit, the air in the hut dropped to an unnatural chill, and a faint icy gust blew out her ritual fire, leaving behind a sharp, sulfuric odor of failure. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. The child was not merely running. The child was fighting back, and she had taken the core of the power. Stepmother Bola staggered back, collapsing onto her mat, the terrible truth dawning. Her sophisticated plan had been dismantled by the purest force she had underestimated, a daughter's desperate, profound love. Bola arrived back at the edge of her village just as the sun was rising, casting long, dramatic shadows. She moved slowly, carefully, hidden by the tall perimeter fence. The village felt unnaturally quiet, the atmosphere thick with the smell of wood smoke and a lingering, faint trace of the dark herbs she had come to know. She looked toward her compound, her heart clenching at the sight of her father's hut. The physical exhaustion was immense, but she pushed it aside, the urgency of her mission overriding every physical sensation. This was the point of no return. She reached into her pouch, feeling the hard outline of the obsidian arrowhead and the smooth powder of the counter magic. Her fear was immense, but it was matched and overcome by the chilling, righteous anger that was no longer entirely her own. It was the quiet, simmering fury of the vengeful spirit moving with her. She took a moment, kneeling behind the bushes, to whisper the words Mama Yajide had taught her, a short prayer of protection, invoking the ancestors to shield her human form as she stepped into the spiritual fray. She took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the dust and the fear. Tears welled up again, final tears of sorrow for the home that had been lost, for the father who had been betrayed. But she wiped them away, hardening her resolve. The child's tears were now the fuel of a warrior. She stood up, emerging from the shadows, ready to walk into the center of the stepmother's trap. Bola walked silently into the compound and straight toward the cooking hearth, the place where the broken pot had cemented her stepmother's dominance. Stepmother Bola was there, stirring a pot, but her movements were agitated, her eyes dark with sleepless paranoia. She was expecting the child, but not the child she saw now. The stepmother whirled around, her eyes widening at the sight of Bola, who was not fleeing or crying, but standing straight, radiating a terrible, unnatural calm. "You," the stepmother hissed, her voice a low snarl of rage and disbelief. "You dare return? You little thief." "I returned to free my mother," Bola stated, her voice unnaturally steady, carrying a weight that was not her own. She lifted her hand, displaying the scrap of wedding cloth, letting the stepmother see the evidence of her failure and violation. The sight of the cloth instantly robbed the stepmother of her breath. In a blind, desperate fury, stepmother Bola lunged, her hand reaching out to seize the cloth, her composure finally breaking. But as she moved, a gust of intensely cold wind whipped through the open kitchen, though not a single tree branch outside moved. The stepmother staggered back, clutching her head, as if struck by an unseen, icy hand. Bola saw it, a shimmering, spectral outline forming in the corner of her vision, a translucent figure of a beautiful, furious woman. Her mother's vengeful spirit had arrived, summoned by the sight of the binding cloth, and it was ready to strike. The tears of sorrow were replaced by tears of profound, terrifying awe. The confrontation exploded into a chaotic struggle. Stepmother Bola, empowered by desperation, launched herself again, this time ignoring the chill and clawing at Bola's tunic. The child, small but driven by the spirit's fury, held fast to the cloth. As they wrestled, the vengeful spirit's presence intensified. The air became frigid, metal objects in the courtyard began to rattle. The wind howled directly over them, but nowhere else. The stepmother was fighting not just a child, but the unseen, immense fury of the wronged spirit. The stepmother's face was twisted in a mixture of terror and raw power. "The ancestors will strike you down for this defiance," she screamed, her voice cracking with the strain of fighting the unseen force. She managed to tear the cloth slightly, sending a sharp, agonizing wave of pain through Baba Bola's distant hut. Bola used the distraction, quickly pulling out the obsidian arrowhead coated with the protective unguent. Acting on Mama Yajide's instructions, she thrust the arrow into the earth directly between her and the struggling stepmother. The stone immediately began to vibrate, channeling the spectral energy. A bolt of icy energy, the full force of the vengeful spirit, struck the stepmother as she recoiled from the arrowhead. She screamed, not in pain, but in recognition and fear, realizing that the very spirit she had bound to steal life was now turned upon her. The power she had manipulated was now her judge. The immense spiritual energy released by the vengeful spirit's strike forced stepmother Bola to stumble back, her defenses momentarily shattered. This was Bola's chance. Clutching the cloth, she ran toward her father's hut, the only destination that mattered. She found her father gasping, racked by a final, terrible seizure. He was fading fast, his life force clinging by a fragile thread. The sight was devastating, bringing fresh, urgent tears to her eyes, tears that held the countermagic. Stepmother Bola pursued her, recovering quickly, her eyes burning with an unholy malice. She reached the doorframe just as Bola reached the mat. "It ends here," the stepmother shrieked, preparing a final, desperate burst of energy, aiming to bind both father and daughter to oblivion. Bola acted instinctively. She knelt by her father, touching his feverish brow, and whispered the incantation Mama Yajide had taught her, using her own tears, the potent countermagic, to trace a circle around the fragment of the wedding cloth. The sight of his beautiful daughter and the scent of the countermagic seemed to cut through his haze. As Bola completed the circle, a blinding, white flash of energy erupted from the cloth. This wasn't the cold fury of the vengeful spirit, but the true, pure energy of her mother's soul, finally liberated from the wicked binding. The white light struck stepmother Bola, not with icy malice, but with a searing, spiritual purity. The moment the pure light struck stepmother Bola, her figure seemed to shudder and waver. The cold beauty she possessed vanished. Her face was momentarily stripped of its cruel composure, revealing a deep, ancient sorrow and bitter, defeated resentment. She let out a long, anguished cry that held the pain of generations of injustice. The magic binding her to the task and the magic binding the spirit both broke. The white light retreated, and stepmother Bola collapsed onto the earth outside the hut, not injured, but completely and utterly stripped of power. She was reduced to a woman overwhelmed by the failure of her vengeance, defeated by the pure heart of a child. Baba Bola, who had watched the blinding flash, coughed one last, deep cough, then fell still. Bola stood over him, tears of terror streaming down her face, fearing the worst. But the terrible shadow on his face had lifted. His breathing, though shallow, was now deep and steady. The drain on his life force had stopped. The vengeful spirit, now free, did not linger. Bola felt a final, gentle warmth on her cheek, a feeling of pure love and gratitude, and then the spiritual presence vanished, leaving behind only the profound silence of a battle won. Her mother was finally at peace. Bola turned to her stepmother, who lay defeated on the ground. She saw not a terrifying sorceress, but a miserable, broken woman. The victory brought not joy, but a deep, sorrowful ache for the destruction of her family and the ruin caused by old, unhealed wounds. Word of the chaotic scene in Baba Bola's compound quickly spread. The villagers, drawn by the unnatural wind and the final, strange cry, gathered cautiously in the square. They saw a sight that shattered their long-held belief in stepmother Bola's piety. Stepmother Bola was being led away, not by guards, but by the weight of her own shame and defeat, supported by two solemn village elders. Her clothes were disheveled, her beauty gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed misery that confirmed the rumors of darkness and broken magic. She met no one's eye, a walking testament to her own wicked secrets. Bola stood quietly in the doorway of her hut, watching the proceedings. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but standing tall. The villagers now looked at her with a mix of awe and deep pity. They finally saw the truth of her suffering, the truth they had so easily dismissed before. Elder Mama, the wise woman who had initially dismissed Bola, approached the child with a look of profound, humbled remorse. She knelt before Bola, placing her hands together in a gesture of respect and apology. "The ancestors saw what our old eyes refused to see, little one," she whispered. You have saved us all from a curse we didn't know we carried." The tears Bola shed now were complex. Tears for the shame of the stepmother, tears for the validation of her truth, and tears for the crushing burden of responsibility finally being lifted. The entire village bore silent, somber witness to the end of a long, terrible injustice. The days that followed were quiet, filled with the slow, difficult process of healing. Baba Bola was weak, but no longer fading. The color slowly returned to his skin, and the debilitating cough ceased. The greatest change was in his mind. The fog of the binding was gone, replaced by a deep, painful clarity. He woke one morning and saw Bola sitting beside him, holding his hand, and the recognition in his eyes was immediate and heartbreaking. "Bola," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "My child, what have I done? Why didn't I see?" The memory of his absence, his failure to protect her, was a greater pain than the spiritual sickness. Bola wept, laying her head on his chest, relieved to feel the steady, strong beat of his heart once more. She spoke to him softly, not about the horror of the magic, but about the love of her mother that had returned to set them both free. She told him he was sick, not blind, and that the sickness was now gone. The father's tears, streaming down his face, were tears of immense grief and gratitude. He held her tightly, the physical reconnection and anchor after months of spiritual drift. The sight was deeply emotional, a release of all the suppressed sorrow and fear that had gripped them. This moment was the true restoration. The love between father and daughter, once eclipsed by the shadow of dark magic, now shone with a raw, undeniable brilliance. The sorrow was still present, but it was being washed clean by the overwhelming power of their reunited bond. 1 month passed. The compound, once suffocatingly cold, now bustled with quiet, restorative activity. Baba Bola, though still frail, was overseeing the reconstruction of the home and the burning of the old ritual hut, cleansing the space with smoke and fresh life. He was a man reborn, deeply attentive to his daughter. Bola was no longer haunted. She laughed easily, playing with the children in the compound, her movements light and free of fear. The sorrow of the past lingered, but it no longer defined her. She carried the obsidian arrowhead not as a weapon, but as a silent, sacred reminder of her mother's strength and the power of truth. The memory of the stepmother and the dark magic was receding, treated by the village not with fear, but with solemn distance. The house was run with simple, honest care, filled with the joy and peace that had been stolen. Father and daughter spent hours simply talking, rebuilding the trust and affection that had been so brutally broken. Bola was now known throughout the village not as the grieving child, but as the child of courage, the one who dared to challenge the darkness and win. Her tears, once symbols of her sorrow, were now memories of the spiritual battle that had saved her family and freed a righteous spirit. The true ending of the curse was not the stepmother's defeat, but the simple, profound return of light and honest love to their home. The sorrow of the past was now the deep soil from which their new, vibrant life was growing. The village organized a quiet, beautiful ceremony by the river to honor the vengeful spirit who had saved them. It was a festival of the free spirit. Bola and Baba Bola stood side by side, dressed in pristine white cloth, leading the procession. They launched a small, intricate raft onto the dark river, bearing the remaining honey cakes, flowers, and the wooden bird prepared months ago. As the raft drifted away under the light of a new moon, Bola whispered a final prayer of gratitude, feeling a deep, abiding peace in her heart. Her mother's story was now one of fierce love and ultimate peace. Baba Bola put a strong, reassuring arm around his daughter's shoulder. He looked down at her, his eyes clear and full of love, and gave her a smile, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, the first true smile she had seen in years. "You are my strength, my little Bola," he murmured. "You brought the light back." Bola leaned into her father's embrace, looking out at the vast, star-strewn sky. The story had been one of heartbreak and vengeance, but it ended here, in the overwhelming, cleansing power of love and redemption. The darkness was gone, and their tears were now tears of overwhelming happiness. They walked back toward their illuminated hut, hand in hand, toward a future rebuilt by courage and grace. The first duty of the new dawn was the complete eradication of the residual darkness. Baba Bola, dressed in strong, clean work clothes, oversaw the final, methodical burning of everything associated with the stepmother's rituals. He used a powerful, purifying smoke mixture, guided by the remaining village elders. Bola stood by the fire pit, her eyes clear, watching the remnants of the strange, bitter herbs turn to ash. The medicinal scent that had once symbolized fear and sickness now twisted into a cleansing, sharp smoke, signifying the complete physical removal of the curse. As the last of the ritual waste crackled into nothingness, Baba Bola took Bola's hand and poured a stream of clear water over the cleansed earth. It was a simple, profound gesture, washing away the past, inviting purity and health back into the soil and the heart of their home. The father and daughter embraced amidst the rising smoke, the silence between them a testament to the shared trauma and the difficult, honest work of moving forward. The scent of wood smoke, not dark herbs, was the new, welcome aroma of their home. Baba Bola resumed his duties as a trader, but his manner was fundamentally changed. He was no longer withdrawn. He was present, listening not just to prices and gossip, but to the small concerns of his neighbors. Bola accompanied him, helping to set out the goods. A young woman approached the stall, looking worriedly at her own small child, recounting a minor illness. The old Baba Bola would have been oblivious. The new Baba Bola listened intently, offering not goods, but a word of genuine, careful advice rooted in the hard-won wisdom of his own suffering. He looked at Bola, his eyes reflecting a deep gratitude. "I see them now, my daughter," he murmured. "I see the small sorrows and the quiet truths in people's eyes, the things I was too clouded to notice before. You gave me back my sight, Bola." Tears pricked Bola's eyes, tears of pride and profound relief that her father was not only physically restored but spiritually awake. Her greatest sorrow had been his absence. Now, his clear-sighted presence was her greatest joy. The community, having witnessed the failure of their own judgment, sought ways to show amends and respect. A group of men, including Elder Mama's son, approached Baba Bola offering help. They began the work of repairing the village perimeter fence, which had fallen into disrepair during the season of strife. Bola watched them work, understanding the symbolic weight of the task. They were not just mending wood. They were mending the boundaries of trust and community that had been breached by the stepmother's deception. The physical labor was a cleansing ritual for the entire village, a collective act of atonement. Bola brought them fresh water and shared cassava bread, receiving warm, humble smiles in return, not of pity, but of profound respect for the child who had taught them the meaning of true vigilance. This shared work showed Bola that her fight was not an isolated burden, but a necessary act that ultimately strengthened the entire collective, proving that the deepest healing comes through communal effort. Bola was summoned to Elder Mama's hut once more, but this time, the atmosphere was one of quiet solemnity and respect. The elder offered a formal apology, not just for her dismissal, but for the blindness of the old ways when faced with new, subtle evils. "I relied on tradition, Bola, and I failed to see the heart of the matter," the elder confessed, her aged voice trembling slightly. "You understood that true wickedness often wears the mask of efficiency. Your courage is a lesson to us all." She presented Bola with a gift, a small, smooth piece of river-washed wood, carved into the shape of a strong, enduring root. "Wear this," the elder said. "It signifies the deep strength of your foundation. No shadow can cut down a root that is well-loved." Bola accepted the gift with grace, her earlier pain at the elder's dismissal now replaced by a quiet, deep satisfaction. The community's highest authority had acknowledged her truth, solidifying her status not as a victim, but as a keeper of difficult, necessary wisdom. The village gathered for the nightly communal fire, a place usually reserved for tales of ancestors and heroes. Tonight, the focus shifted. The village storyteller, a man of great gravity, looked directly at Bola. He began to tell a new tale, the story of a young girl, small stature, great heart, who walked the path of fear to reclaim the light. He carefully anonymized the names, but recounted the events with an emotional precision that brought tears to the eyes of the listeners. Bola listened, her hand clutching the root carving. The telling of the story was the final, formal act of communal healing and recognition. It cemented her journey into the oral history of the Abeji people, ensuring her mother's suffering and her own courage would never be forgotten. Hearing her pain and triumph elevated into a shared mythic narrative was deeply moving. It was the moment her sorrow was transformed into eternal strength, validating every desperate step she had taken. Baba Bola and Bola undertook a small, private ritual, lighting the first fire in the newly rebuilt, consecrated cooking hearth. They used kindling gathered from the brightest, healthiest trees. As the flames caught, sending up a clean, joyous smoke, Baba Bola spoke simply. "This fire will only cook food seasoned with love, my Bola. No bitterness, no poison, no deception will ever touch our hearth again." Bola stirred the first pot of soup, inhaling the pure, honest scent of pepper and yams. The warmth of the fire on her face was a physical manifestation of the spiritual warmth restored to their home. This was a quiet, domestic scene, yet intensely emotional. The hearth, once the site of the stepmother's watchful, cold dominance, was now the heart of their renewed, pure family life. Baba Bola insisted on taking a private journey with Bola back to the dried-up stream, where she had seen the warning omen. He needed to physically walk the path of her terror. At the crossing, they stood together. Bola pointed out the spot where the dead monitor lizard had been placed. Baba Bola knelt, gently scraping away the dirt where the magic had rested. He spoke about the stepmother, not with bitterness, but with a profound, sorrowful pity. She was a daughter of a wounded family, Bola. Her vengeance consumed her, but it was born from old pain. May she find peace, far from us. Together, they threw a handful of sand into the non-existent stream, symbolically releasing the stepmother and her secrets to the dry earth, ensuring that her bitterness could not contaminate their future. It was a difficult but necessary act of emotional closure. One morning, Bola was chasing a stray chicken that had wandered into the compound. Baba Bola, watching from the doorway, let out a deep, booming laugh, the kind of spontaneous, unrestrained laughter Bola had not heard since her birth mother was alive. The sound was shockingly beautiful, ringing with health and pure joy. Bola stopped chasing the chicken, her eyes wide with happy disbelief, and she began to laugh too, a clear, bell-like sound that echoed the freedom in her father's voice. They stood there for a long moment, simply laughing together, tears of joy streaming down both their faces. It was an overwhelming release of the long-held tension, a confirmation that true, unburdened happiness was finally possible again. This scene was purely emotional, marking the moment when the trauma was finally eclipsed by the spontaneous, healing power of shared, genuine joy. Bola returned to the old, crumbling ancestor shrine where she had received the obsidian arrowhead. The arrowhead remained her most sacred possession, but she sought a different kind of connection today. She carried a small, potent oil palm seed, a symbol of prosperity and lasting life. She knelt where she had wept and planted the seed in the rich, dark earth near the stones. "Thank you, ancestors," she whispered. "Thank you for the shield, the sight, and the strength. Let this seed grow strong and feed our children, a reminder that truth always returns to the earth." This was an act of reverence and forward-looking faith. She wasn't asking for protection anymore. She was giving thanks and planting a new promise for the future, knowing her mother's spirit was now guarding the growth from a place of peace. A figure appeared at the village gate, Mama Yajide. She had made the difficult journey from the hills to see the result of Bola's courage with her own eyes. Bola ran to meet her, embracing the seer with all the warmth of a grateful heart. Mama Yajide surveyed the village, the cleansed compound, and Baba Bola working nearby, a satisfied, knowing smile on her face. "The wind of truth blows cleaner here now, little one," Mama Yajide observed. She stayed only for a brief, affirming visit, ensuring the spiritual healing was complete and the dark threads were fully severed. The visit was a powerful external validation of Bola's success, linking the magic of the hills to the peace of the village, and showing Bola that she now possessed a lifelong connection to the wise woman. Baba Bola brought home a beautiful, newly woven sleeping mat, crafted not from dull reeds, but from bright, intricately colored fiber. He placed it carefully in his hut, displacing the old, cheap mat that had concealed the stepmother's secrets. "This," he told Bola, "is a mat for sweet dreams and honest rest. May only good thoughts rest on it." Bola helped him smooth it out, thinking of the dark hollow beneath the old mat, which had held her mother's violated essence. The beauty and honesty of the new mat was a simple, tangible symbol of the transparency and peace restored to their lives. Bola sat once more beneath the ancient baobab tree, the same spot where her sorrow had begun. She brought the mended doll and the carved root. She remembered the fear and loneliness of that first evening, the shadow stretching out like a grasping hand. Now, the shadow was simply a comforting blanket, and the air was filled with peace. She felt the lingering presence of her mother's spirit, but now it was a gentle, guiding warmth, a powerful ancestral light that had chosen to protect its own, rather than haunt them. She looked toward the hut, seeing her father working contentedly. The tears she shed were tears of closure, a quiet, deep acceptance of the past, an immense gratitude for the present. The day came for Bola to leave for her studies. Baba Bola walked with her to the edge of the village, his heart filled with pride and a natural, proud sadness. He presented her with one final, essential gift, a small leather pouch containing the obsidian arrowhead. "Keep this," he instructed, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for magic, but as a reminder that the greatest strength is the willingness to fight for the truth, even when you fight alone." Bola accepted the token, kissing her father's hand. It was a difficult farewell, but unlike the escape years ago, this separation was born of love and purpose, not fear. The sight of her small, determined figure walking away, carrying not only books but the wisdom of a spiritual warrior, was intensely emotional. A daughter stepping into a bright, hard-earned future. Bola returned home at the end of the dry season, not as the small, frightened child who had run away, but as a confident, poised young woman, carrying books and a new authority. Baba Bola waited at the gate, his face wreathed in a magnificent smile. The embrace they shared was long and silent, communicating all the love, pride, and shared memory words could not convey. The entire village came out to greet her, honoring her with song. She had gone from being a symbol of communal sorrow to being the living embodiment of their hope and resilience. This was a scene of powerful, collective happiness, witnessing the triumph of intellect and spirit over the long shadow of the past. That evening, by the communal fire, Bola was asked to share some of her new knowledge. She did not lecture, but spoke softly, using parables drawn from her studies and her own life. She told the children that the most powerful magic was not in the herbs or the spirits, but in the honesty you keep in your own heart. She spoke of the importance of vigilance and seeing clearly. Her words, woven with the hard-earned wisdom of her youth, resonated deeply with the villagers. She had become a natural leader, using her painful past to illuminate the path forward for her community. Baba Bola watched her, tears of pure, unadulterated pride filling his eyes. He knew he was looking at the woman his late wife would have wanted her to be, a true blessing upon the earth. Years later, Bola, now a respected young leader and scholar, sat with her aging, happy father beneath the newly grown, strong vine that covered their hut. Baba Bola was gray now, but vibrant and full of joy. He placed his hand over hers. "Our life was broken, my daughter, but you put it back together, stronger than before," he whispered. "You did more than save me. You taught me how to live again." Bola smiled, her eyes filled with peaceful love. She looked at the thriving compound, the happy laughter of the children playing in the yard, and the steady, honest peace that settled over the village every night. The sorrow was a memory, sharp but distant. The setting sun cast a golden glow over their home. The story of the stepmother's secrets had indeed been one of tears and terror, but it culminated here, in a profound, lasting legacy of light, proving that the deepest love will always awaken a protective spirit and lead to the happiest, most truthful end. Please subscribe, comment, like, share for more videos.